the Napster revolution was one that took a little while to realize what was going on, because I'd have conversations with friends of mine, and it's like, yeah, we're like, is there going to be another Nirvana? Could there be like another Beatles? Would that be even possible right now? And I appreciate this stuff more now, but we were talking about all the boy band pop music that was all over MTV and all that stuff, and how much we missed Alternative Nation.
Welcome to episode 140 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. All right, folks, like I've mentioned, I've been doing this new segment on the show, right, where I rattle off 5 bass players' names and get the initial thoughts and feelings from the guest about the bass players that I mentioned. Now, this episode was a little different because going into the episode, I knew Chris and I were going to be talking about the nature of rock history. So this episode's a little different, but check the last few episodes, and I'm looking to name the segment. Segment, and I'm asking the listeners to submit potential names of what this segment could be called. So, if you have an idea of what we could call this segment, the nature of the segment is listing five bass players. Maybe it's 5 records, something. You're listing 5 and getting initial thoughts on that. It's pretty much going to be bass players. I think I'm going to kind of keep it that way. Maybe the guest knows of the bass player. Maybe they don't. I don't know. It's a fun little game. But check out the segment. And if you have a submission for what you think the segment should be called, please drop it in the comments below here on YouTube. All right, so I had an amazing experience last night. I went to go see Ron Carter play at Catalina's Jazz Club in Hollywood. I went there with Jerry Jamont. Jerry Jamont's birthday is coming up on March 22nd, and we went to go see Ron on March 20th. So, like, I knew Ron was coming to town. I had told a student about it. The student then reminded me at the lesson, like, hey, I got tickets to go see Ron. I'm like, oh, right. I got to get tickets to go see Ron. I don't know why I call him Ron. Out of respect, I always call him Mr. Carter. Usually, I did last night while talking to him. It is Mr. Carter. I have to go get tickets to see Mr. Carter. And so I got online, got the tickets, called Jerry, like, yo, man, I'm taking you to go see Mr. Carter for your birthday. I hope you got the time free. He's like, yeah, man, I'm down. I'm like, cool. So Jerry Jamont and I went to Catalina's last night to go see Mr. Carter play with the Foresight Quartet. Amazing quartet. I got to hang backstage with Mr. Carter, and it was so inspiring. This is the first time I had heard him play live, and he's 89 years old and still crushing it. Like, all over the bass. He the tune right before the last tune, he did a solo performance based on the song You Are My Sunshine, but in there there's so many jazz quotes, and there was at one point he was playing the first Bach cello suite. He quoted that in the solo. It was pretty killing and incredibly inspiring. I got to talk to him backstage, and we're hopefully going to be able to schedule the time so he'll come on the podcast. That's absolutely huge to me. And wonderful time. Well, I was at Catalina's. They sat us at the table, and I'm kind of looking around, and then all of a sudden, I see comedian Greg Proops. Greg Proops was on the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? Years ago, Greg Proops did a stand-up special at Musso and Frank's in Hollywood, California, and they had a group there, and I was playing bass in the group for the stand-up special. And so, fast forward, I see Greg Proops there at Catalina's last night. I'm like, hey, Greg, what up, man? My name's Ryan. Like, I played bass on that special. Greg, cool, man. How you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Great to reconnect with him. I asked him to come on the podcast. One, I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and Greg, I think, is hilarious. So, might have a little deviation in programming coming up as Greg and I sort out a time to have him come on the podcast. I have always been fascinated about the kind of relationship between stand-up comics and musicians. That always fascinates me. I think that there's a lot of similarities there, not only as just artists, but as freelancers, things like that. I want to kind of dive into those with Greg. So we'll see what happens, and stay tuned for that episode that will hopefully be coming out pretty quick. We still have to schedule the time to record the interview. LemurMusic.com, everything you need for the double bass at LemurMusic.com. Prior to me going to see Mr. Carter last night at Catalina's, I was at Lemur Music picking up a bass that was being worked on for Burbank High School, where I'm a coach for the jazz group and the orchestra, and that bass had a little spill, right? It needed some attention. So I'm picking up the bass at Lemur Music, and the owner was like, hey, do you mind playing on this one for me? It just needs to loosen up a little bit. I'm like, okay, cool. And it had the nylon strings on it, and I knew Lemur Music was supplying the bass for Mr. Carter's performance at Catalina's all weekend. And so I played on it. I got to play, the bass. Ron was doing that whole his run of dates at Catalina, and the bass sounded great. I thought they were new strings actually, but she told me they were not new, but they still had the life of new strings. Like, they had settled, the upright strings had settled, so they weren't brand new. You could just feel that they had settled, but they still had the vibrance of new strings. It's great sounding bass, played awesome, and I got to share that with Ron while in the green room. I thought that was pretty cool. He was making jokes about if I had played all the right notes or not. I told him no, I did not. That I left all the right notes for him to play. Stop by Lemur Music. Check out their inventory of basses, bows, rosin, practice accessories, sheet music, you name it. LemurMusic.com. Here it is, folks. Jerry Jamont 15 timeless bass lines right here in paperback. All the songs in here. There we got Peace in My Heart, Deborah, Think, You Send Me, I Say a Little Prayer, People Gotta Be Free, I Ain't Got No, I Got Life by Nina Simone, Instant Groove, Why I Sing the Blues, The Thrill Is Gone, So Excited, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, Attica Blues, Hot Southern Soul, and City Blues. 15 timeless bass lines by the great Jerry Jamont. One of my favorite things about this book is the spiral binding, right? Me and Jerry were pretty adamant about that, so that when you put it on a music stand, it'll lay flat. All the other ones with the glue never works out well. So Jerry and I were really really intentional about these being spiral bound. But you can pick up your copy of Jerry Jamont's 15 timeless bass lines. Jerry and I put together this book, and there's videos that go along with each track of the book, where Jerry talks about behind the scenes, kind of the recording sessions, what influences bass lines. We cover a lot of different topics as they all relate to the music. Again, Jerry Jamont, 15 timeless bass lines. Stop by thebassshedacademy.org to get your copy of the paperback or an ebook. On the episode is double bassist, educator, and the owner of Zimmerman Publications, Chris Hornung. Chris Hornung is a double bassist in Orange County area, and I've known him for a few years from being involved with Lemur Music. And every time I'm at Lemur while he's there, we regularly end up kind of talking about rock history, which is a topic I know he teaches. Chris was born and raised in Michigan. He began his musical journey studying piano at the age of 6, and then later switched to cello at the age of 10. Finally, I don't know about finally, but he moved on and started his pursuit with the double bass at age 12. Chris holds a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University and a Master of Music degree from Michigan State University. He serves as the principal bassist for the Dana Point Symphony, Symphony Irvine, and the Orchestra Collective of Orange County. His performance experience includes performances with the Lansing, Kalamazoo, Jackson, Battle Creek, and West Michigan Symphonies, as well as the Opera Tampa and the California Chamber Orchestra. He has been featured twice as a soloist with the Orange County Symphony and remains active as a chamber musician and solo recitalist. In addition to staying active as a performer, Chris is also a dedicated educator. He is a faculty member of Concordia University Irvine, Orange Coast College, Chaffey College, Mira Costa College, and Coastline College, where he chairs the Visual and Performing Arts Department. During the summer, Chris teaches double bass and music history at the Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp in Michigan and performs as a principal bassist for the Festival Orchestra. Chris is also the owner of Zimmerman Publications. Zimmerman Publications was founded in 1969 by renowned double bassist and educator Oscar Zimmerman. Zimmerman Publications specializes in providing high-quality solo and orchestral sheet music for the double bass. There's a link in the show notes below, and definitely stop by Zimmerman Publications. It's always great to hang with Chris, and some of my favorite conversations with him have always been not talking about things that are so bass specific. So I went into Lemur. I don't know, a few days ago, and you said hello to everybody in the shop there, and Chris right away asked me. He's like, "Man, is there somebody in the Eagles named Jeff?" I'm like, I don't know, not off the top of my head. Like, I can't think of it. Like, that seems random. Why do you ask? And he's like, well, man, the Big Lebowski. Like, he knows I'm a big Lebowski fan. He's like, in the Big Lebowski, the dude regularly talks about his contempt for the Eagles. I won't quote that because there's a gnarly F-bomb that happens in there. But I'm like, yeah. And so Chris then was like diving into kind of the meaning behind why that they would pick the Eagles in why the character hates the Eagles. It was hilarious. And then right away I'm like, dude, you got to come on the podcast. We got to talk about rock history. Like, that's what I want to talk about on the podcast, is rock history. And he's like, yeah, man, yeah. This was a fantastic time. I always love talking to Chris about rock music history and music in general, because the conversation always goes so many places. We talk a lot about just historical things, cultural things, economic aspects, things that were all driving rock music and the music industry, the record industry, and how rock music was so closely related to the record industry. And here it is. Here's my talk with Chris Hornung, double bassist, educator, and owner of Zimmerman Publications. How you doing, man?
Not too bad. How have you been?
Nice. Good. I went to go see Ron last night.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Catalina?
Yeah, over at Catalina's. That was fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was T, but then I saw the pictures that Jason had dropped off that bass to him. Bass sounded fantastic. But do you know what the strings those are that are on his bass?
Those are the Labella black nylon tape.
Okay.
Called them Deep Talkin'. I think black nylon tape is what I think we have them on our website for.
Okay. Yeah, I know, like, Deep Talkin' is a thing that Labella does even on electric strings.
Okay.
That's just kind of a brand that they do.
Yeah. Different sound on those for sure.
Yeah, it's cool. I've after playing that bass, that he was playing with it, I'm like, maybe I should put a set of those on just to check them out for a while. But you're locked in. Like, you're locked into, that's the jazz bass.
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't bowable.
Oh yeah. I've tried.
Yeah. Man, so I was thinking about when I came into the shop yesterday, and you asked me about if there was a Jeff in the Eagles. What brought that up?
We were actually I was just working with a high school orchestra, and they're doing an Eagles medley. Mm-hmm. And I was, making the dude reference.
Of course.
I hate the,
Yeah. Leaving the F-bomb out, but yeah.
And I remembered reading a interpretation that someone had somewhere about the dude always talking down on the Eagles, and that being because it's supposed to be about the Steely Dan Eagles rivalry. And because there's a Walter and a Donnie, and that's why I was asking if there was a Jeff, which Skunk, I guess, was Skunk Baxter was with Steely Dan at one point. All those yacht rock guys played with each other at one time or another. So that's where that is. But there actually was a Jeff, Walter, and Don. If that's like supposed to be like something of a Steely Dan metaphor, and that's why they keep talking trash on the Eagles.
It's like the Coen brothers deep cut meets music history.
Yeah, it's those of us who just watched that movie way too many times and start to interpret.
I know. I had to go down all the rabbit holes of it. Man, I love that movie.
Yeah. Oh, same. Yeah.
I think that's my favorite Coen brothers movie.
Definitely. That, I mean, I might have watched Fargo just as much. There's just so different that it's hard to compare those two. But yeah, I like them both.
When I saw Fargo, I mean, I saw it like when it first hit VHS, I think is when I saw it. And I didn't understand it yet. I didn't understand the Coen brothers dark comedy thing, it was a little over my head then. But then by the time there's just something there's so many layers, at least to Lebowski. Like you can just check in on surface level and it's a fun movie, or you can really go all the way in on it and then you understand the brilliance of all the nuance. Like I've looked up the show Branded that's referenced several times. They were like I've watched episodes of it. Like I had to know what was going on in that show.
The Lebowski rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah. Well, I forgot there was some scene where he was singing the theme song to it. I think he was in his car.
Yeah.
Man, I want to talk about rock music history.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about classical bass too.
But, good with all of it. Yeah.
What? Now you teach the class at Concordia.
I teach it at Chaffey and at Coastline College.
Oh, okay. Okay.
In 2-year community colleges. I'm just doing bass at Concordia.
Okay. Okay. Where do you start with rock music history? Because you have to now. Wouldn't you have to define like this is the start of rock and roll, like it with Buddy Holly, or how does the course subscribe the origin of rock and roll?
I start by listening to like 2 songs actually. We'll listen to "Rock Around the Clock" and "Rocket '88." "Rocket '88." A lot of people have defined that as the first rock and roll song coming out of Sun Records, pushed by Chess. They both those were involved, so of course it's like the beginning of rock history there. As a fuzzy guitar sound that I guess was a mistake. Just ended up coming off on that one, and then "Rock Around the Clock." It's got a lot of the same. Yeah, they're both 12-bar blues. A lot of the same elements that would come to define rock, and I just asked them a bunch of questions on that. Then I go back to the styles that lead up to that, starting with some the Tin Pan Alley songwriting in New York, and early days of country music, Carter Family and Hank Williams, and some Western swing is really big with that.
Sure.
Actually, Bob Wills has even said that he thinks he created rock because he's combining jazz and fiddle music together, and that's basically what it was. And then a huge section on the blues, a little bit of jazz history leading up to swing, and then blues. Blues is the biggest element of that. So yeah, kind of like your early 20th century, the styles that started to mesh together. But after playing those 2 songs, because then they could start to hear elements of all of those other genres that meshed. I always compare it to kind of like your ancestry DNA. Right. You might have, if I was going to do mine, it would be a huge chunk is German, a Polish side and a French side. But you do rock and roll, like you've got, I'd say 75% of it is blues. You got a huge chunk that's country and some that's Tin Pan Alley and folk and all of those things there. So that's the pre-rock stuff that starts there. And then, then Chess and Sun Records are a couple big ones that I go over. The Muddy Waters and how electrified blues took off there, and that ends with Chuck Berry and rock taking off there. Similar kind of thing for Sun Records with Elvis, and then a big thing on Buddy Holly. Then I do a day on 3 pianists, Ray Charles, Fats Domino, and Lil Richard, and kind of. With a couple exceptions, all the different ways that those guys were completely out of the picture by the time you get to 1960.
Right. But see, it's like all those guys can be referenced on, the founding fathers of R&B also. So I feel like, during those years, it was such the music that was happening would then split. And like some elements would be developed going this way, and you would get into then soul, and which would then lead to funk, and James. That's still a through line to James Brown as much as it is the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely, yeah. And then it got to be just kind of the uncomfortable racial discussion from back there. It's like they're going to push this music for a white crowd and this music for a black crowd, and
Right.
sometimes it kind of sounds the same. Actually, that goes all the way back to country and blues. Some
Right.
Hank Williams songs probably could have been called blues if he would have had a black audience. And yeah, then that same thing kind of still happening today. You call something R&B, there's like I remember like En Vogue songs back in the '90s that had like shredding guitar solos.
I loved In Vogue. I loved that period of R&B because then that was still it was definitely more of a difference between R&B and hip hop then. Now everything is so put together. But that was definitely R&B because all the live musicians that would play on it, like those bass lines were killer. All the playing on it was fantastic. But yeah, they would have some shredder. I was talking about this with a student not that long ago, that's maybe last week, that's into really old time country, like really old time music, old fiddle music and all that stuff. And we were talking about the blues and things, and how much that it's really, I feel like the racial divide that set the same music on two different trajectories, because then the blues would, I mean, I have not done like a deep research paper on the blues. But everything I've heard and read and documented on different recordings is that, I think it was put the best in a Robert Johnson documentary, was that blues didn't come from the church. Blues came from the fields that would then go to the church, and then the music evolved kind of that way, but it started in the fields. And it seems like, that community, those folks were doing it in the fields, and then there's a part of it that went to like the Appalachian way and then ended up with the fiddle. But it was at one point it was all like very basic 12 bar or even no form blues based music that just was kind of, because of segregation, ended up being two different things.
Yeah, and that's why the first, when it gets into like defining it as rock and roll, that's Alan Freed that started using that term, and like I think it was 1951.
That was the DJ, right?
Yeah. And he was the first one to notice. It's like, wow, I've got all these. It was a basically white oriented radio station, but even they couldn't segregate radio back, like the radio. Right. Then no matter where, if you're within, you're within the listening audience, it doesn't matter what your neighborhood is. Like that's just the way it was back then. Today too, but so he was noticing that these white kids were calling in to ask for like these Chuck Berry records and things like that, and it was like, so that's when it's rhythm and blues was the term that they were given. Race records before that,
right?
Then they changed that name to rhythm and blues, and then he starts calling it rock and roll, and then the white kids loved it, and it was but yeah, it definitely goes the different ways. You get the country music that has its that great Ken Burns documentary a couple of years ago on the roots of country music, goes into a lot of the British Isles music that came over here that created a lot of these fiddle tunes that we know. And then that, a lot of that came into rock as well.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know about that Ken Burns documentary. Is that similar to what he did on jazz? The jazz one I've watched several times and I love.
Yeah. It's called country music. It's,
okay.
I suppose you could make the same argument that we've all made on the jazz one. It's like, wow, like I guess jazz stopped evolving in 1968 or something. Because it's like, by the way, there's all these other great artists that did things after that.
I mean,
kind of gets to the 90s and it's like that.
Yeah, I've heard that stuff, and I mean, this gets into a whole other topic, but just musicians, including present day Nicholas Payton, that talks about like jazz isn't a thing anymore, and jazz, stopped at 1960. What'd he say? 1962, I think. And I'm like, well, hold on. There's some major records that came out after 1962, that defined the genre, most notably A Love Supreme in 1964. So yeah, I don't know about the Ken Burns thing. I don't know. Wynton was involved, and Wynton is goes all the way back with that music, and so you got to wonder how much influence kind of that played into how they're going to talk about the music on the jazz documentary.
And then you just like, and we don't have to talk about it. It's something we can talk about for the entire
documentary productions.
What both those documentaries did really well is they covered the area that they're covering really well. A lot of like unseen footage from way back. He did his research, and the like his Civil War documentary is the same thing. It's just like everything that Ken Burns does is done so well. It's
I agree. Yeah.
Unless it's going to be a continuing kind of thing that like he puts out 10 hours of footage every year, it's going to have to end somewhere.
Yeah, you're right. You got to stop it unless you just got to subscribe to his documentary, and every year there's an update.
And my history of rock class, actually, I like back on the subject of that one. A lot of times people ask me where does it end, and you have to end somewhere. And I have a friend who teaches at a college in Georgia, and he's about 15 years older than I am, and basically ends in the 80s. Well, for me, I got to cover Nirvana. I got to cover, I got to cover the stuff that like made me love rock and roll. And I got to like all the alternative music and like the stuff that came around, indie rock that I still get into now. But yeah, that I basically end at Napster. So
what year is that? Are we talking like 02, 03?
Yeah, right around. Radiohead, Limp Bizkit are the two last bands that I cover that I both culturally significant.
I'd say Radiohead more than Limp Bizkit.
Yeah,
that's just a personal thing. But
it's good. Not even getting into the stuff that could talk for a while about the stuff that the reasons why they both are. But yeah, as far as like it's got to end somewhere unless it's going to be a class that's perpetual. Someone who's 10 years younger than me might say, how can you not cover the Strokes and the White Stripes and like all this other stuff and getting all the way through the aughts and I suppose that's like turn of the century, but the impact went on from there. And someone 10 years younger than that is going to say, hey, wow, how are you not covering Taylor Swift in the teens and all that stuff? And it's absolutely. It has to end somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess, something that influenced my thoughts on music history and kind of every genre was actually something that Lorne Michaels said, the creator of SNL, unrelated to music. What he talked about was people's favorite year of SNL is when they're teenagers. Like, that's it. Like, wherever you were when you were like probably 13 through 17, your high school years, those will always be your favorite years of SNL. And he's absolutely true as it pertains to me, like the years with Chris Farley and David Spade and all that stuff. But I started thinking about that. And then where you get to know this music is probably where you think it ends. I got to know it, similar to you, around Nirvana. And that was the music coming out when I was just starting to play and get introduced to all these new sounds and stuff. And then looking back, I think that was like the 90s was almost the mark of the rock era. I think kind of rock stopped in the 90s, with the exception of Dave Grohl, but he was in Nirvana. So, he's still bearing the torch. I don't know what to do with some of the other bands, but I think that was the last major rock movement.
Yeah, it is so hard to trace after that, and that's why I talk about ending at Napster, is that by the time you get to internet downloading and MTV's not playing videos anymore, and the radio lost a lot of its power. And now when I actually on the subject of the Eagles thing, I was we're also doing a Beatles medley, and there's a girl in the cello section who's a hardcore Beatles fan, and is like, why aren't we doing Eleanor Rigby? Why aren't we doing this or this or this? Why are we doing these songs? Like she's like I was actually with the Beatles at that age. I was a huge Beatles fan in high school, and was in just like all this stuff about a band that was probably broken up before her parents were born. And it's and there's kids who are huge Fleetwood Mac fans, and sometimes you ask them who like their favorite artist is, and their own friends don't even know who they are. Just like internet and streaming has just changed so much that it's all fragmented. Sure. That's like, there's rock bands out there doing interesting things, but they're not going to fill a stadium anymore.
That's a whole other conversation. Is like, when did the stadium era rock artist end? I mean, like, there's still people doing stadiums now. I mean, Taylor Swift actually,
Yeah.
was it like a year ago, sold out a week at SoFi. Like, that's nuts. It wasn't just one stadium. She did a stadium week. So there's still artists of, that caliber, fill in the seats, I guess, of that caliber. But they're not rock shows.
Yeah.
You're like, maybe, and I don't really follow it all that closely, but I could probably say U2, they're still out there doing it. The big production. It's gonna be a stadium situation. Bruce Springsteen probably.
Yeah, actually, one of the thoughts that I had when that the Sphere was built, and U2 did a big residency there, was what artists are going to fill that? I know they have a Dead and Company, like there's always going to be Deadheads going to see that kind of stuff. I can see like Fish on that same line doing something like that. But it doesn't go too far after that. It's like, Coldplay maybe. They might be able to fill something like that, but it's
are they still active?
They're artists. I don't know. I'd have to look.
I don't know. Like, they're never really on my radar. I'm not a huge. I feel about Coldplay that the dude feels about the Eagles. Oh, yeah. It's whatever. It's not really my thing.
They could probably fill a stadium. It's and that might even be getting more back into some of these nostalgia acts. I remember when Smashing Pumpkins and Jane's Addiction were going to do a stadium tour. I like, really? That was my first. I love both bands. I haven't kept in touch with either. Like, Jane's Addiction's, their era was pretty short before they went their own ways with all the issues they had. But Smashing Pumpkins had a couple albums that meant a lot to me when I was in high school, and but actually then realizing, even just talking about that, it's people my age who finally have the money to go to concerts.
It's just the same as when movies are recreated 20 years later. It's like people our age now have a little bit of money to go do this stuff, and they want to take their kids. I loved it when I was a kid, so now I want to take my kid because I'm hoping that they'll love Pearl Jam just as much as I did, or whoever the band is that's now a legacy act. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's why that 25 year cycle happens. It's like you get this whole resurgence. The people that grew up listening to it now have, hopefully, jobs that can go afford them to go see the concert that they couldn't, and they want to take their kids. Yeah,
that's
normal.
And I didn't have a chance to see that Smashing Pumpkins show, and Jane's Addiction blew up once again before that got too far. But I would have loved to see that. And that's I'm in that category there. And it's interesting also teaching the class, like seeing the perspective on how things go in kind of your generational waves. Everyone thought rock was dead in the early '60s. All the reasons we're talking about Elvis being in the army and Buddy Holly's dead and Chuck Berry's in prison, all that stuff. And then the Beatles come around in '64, and that was a major revolution. And people were saying that rock was dead when it was all, it was mainly your singer-songwriters and the big stadium groups in the mid '70s, and all the New York styles came after that. I would say your punk and disco and even some of the early hip hop was a huge revolution there. And we already talked about the alternative music one, when it was your hair bands that had turned into. I still love that stuff. I love Def Leppard and Motley Crue and all that stuff. I'm your professional appreciator, I suppose. But it's but it goes through like you're like, there's rock is dead has been said a number of times. So, but now we're kind of overdue for another revolution, and I don't know if it's even possible because everything is so fragmented. That same Mariah Carey song is the number one song at Christmas every year. Is that really like culturally relevant now? It's like,
Man, I agree with you that we're kind of due for another movement. I think the last great record, the era of music in general, was the 90s, and that kind of coincides with your ending the class, at least at Napster. It's because everything started running together with the internet, and there wasn't, I don't feel like, how do I put it? That maybe, like, let's put it this way. In the 90s, and I know I've talked about this a lot, at least on the podcast, is whatever genre of music let's take rock because we're talking about it. Within rock in the 90s, you had the Chili Peppers, you had Nirvana, you had, who else was there? The Wallflowers, Weezer, so many bands. And they all had a very, very unique sound, even though they were all part of this thing. You had the Seattle thing, and they had a sound. But then the bands within the Seattle thing all had very distinctive sounds. Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Nirvana, all of them. And there's a lot of identity there, which was really cool. And they were actually talking about their life. And it was, you listen to that stuff, you get an in to where these people are living and all that. Everybody lives on the internet now. So like the music is reflecting the internet and not a life outside of that. You're not brought into a culture or a geographical space or a lifestyle thing. It's all just computer, and you live on the computer, and the music is created on the computer, and they're talking about the computer.
Yeah, that's and actually, and on that kind of like the idea of the cities losing their scene, their identity. Another thing that I cover in my class a lot is the Telecommunications Act in 1996, which was bipartisan. It like plenty of blame to go on both parties. But what they were really looking to do is they knew the internet was going to be a big deal. They were going to deregulate a lot of like interstate issues with that. And one thing that they, these bills end up getting like a million pages long, had the radio station lobbyists that got in there, and they got rid of a rule that went all the way back to the 30s, I think, about limiting the amount of radio stations that a certain corporation could own or a certain person. So then they got rid of that completely, which was the rise of Clear Channel, and now that's iHeart. That changes. That's your iHeart, whatever, iHeart Media,
right,
which owns like, I don't know what the number is, but a huge amount of radio.
Does iHeart own Clear Channel? I actually didn't. I don't know this. I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, I think that's just that it was just that they changed the name. I think it's basically
okay.
So that was part of that even before the internet revolution of all of that. It's like now you listen to they play the Ryan Seacrest show probably in like who knows how many radio, like they don't have like their your morning show from they're your local DJs the way that they used to. They play and then the same thing with the music that they're playing is it's got a real specific list because you've got hundreds of radio stations owned by the same company that is going to homogenize that music in a way that that kind of got rid of the local scene. Of course, it still happens with live music and your independent stations, and then the internet fought back on that a little bit. That's where Napster kind of tore the radio system down a little bit with that.
Sure.
But that was kind of your precursor to that. That's like, like all of a sudden you got all this pop music on the radio. It's not an accident. I think that that had a lot to do with that act. Alternative music was burning itself out at that point anyway. It's so
in 96.
Yeah.
Is that when the bill got passed, or that's when it was presented? Because those things could take years.
I'd have to do the research on that. They call it the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So I think that was probably the year that it was passed. Yeah, and you're right. There's always a ripple effect with when it actually gets enforced.
I'm trying to think about like specifically the kind of mid to late 90s and what the sound was then. It had kind of changed a little bit from the Nirvana grunge thing of the early 90s, and it was getting more into like what would obviously lead into the early 2000s sound with Limp Bizkit and what was the other band that was very much like Limp Bizkit? Korn, but not as heavy. It was kind of like the rap rock.
There's Linkin Park was right around there.
Yeah, Linkin Park, that kind of thing.
Yeah, what I missed like back like the early mid 90s was when they didn't really know what to do with the alternative label. It was just bands that weren't popular. So you listen to a radio station, like, they're gonna be playing the Nirvana stuff that actually is popular, but you might hear like Tori Amos and Biohazard, like, and it's like, like it couldn't be more different. But it was alternative music, so it was on the same radio station. And it was really cool. And then, the way that there's actually a rock critic article that I was reading, preparing for my 90s stuff that I was covering in my class years ago. That made the point that the Live, the band Live, Throwing Copper, their album Bush's 16 Stone and the Alanis Morissette album all came out in 1995, and that was kind of like the 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 major system knew what to do. I mean, I think they're all fantastic albums. I would still listen to them. But yeah, that's kind of like your more commercially viable. That Jagged Little Pill sold like unreal amounts of. I mean, that's one of your biggest selling albums of all time, and it's got that kind of grungy sound. And she's teaming up with a guy who wrote Wilson Phillips songs, and he wrote Michael Jackson's Man on the Mirror. It's like, yeah, now whatever you want to call it, that's still calling that alternative music, but it means something completely different than it did a few years before that.
Right. Yeah, I wonder, maybe you cover this in the class, how that term came to be, like when that term started being used, because I grew up and there was some alternative station back in Phoenix that I was listening to, and it's just what it is. Like it was just like modern rock, I guess, would be what that station played. And some pop, but it was just alternative. And I don't really know where that term came from or how it came to be, and I don't know how much of it was associated with the grunge movement and the kind of big middle finger to super polished rock bands and hair bands and all that. Like, we just want to do something different, and so we're this alternative sound. So did the artists establish that term, or did the industry establish that term, if you know?
I think it was the industry. I had understood that actually K-Rock was a big part of that. I'm not sure if they came up with the term, but there was like a lot of radio stations go through. It gets bought out by someone who owns a similar sounding radio station. So like, actually, it happened when I was growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There were the two big like album rock radio stations, and then whoever owned one of them bought the other one. So now they're not going to compete with each other. They're going to change formats, and they ended up changing to classic rock.
Okay.
It happened with K-Rock, where they were like album oriented rock, and then they and that was early '80s, where like the kind of new wave post punk stuff was coming around, and it was like they didn't really know how to define this stuff, so rock of the 80s is what they called it at first. And I don't know if it was someone at that radio station, but I'd heard that they were instrumental in that okay. they were starting to play. Yeah, some of it might be some of your British post-punk, your kind of like Joy Division, which isn't exactly punk, but yeah, has some of the same roots there. And then it gets to be a term that just is like, all right, it's not what they're playing on MTV.
Right.
And then impossible to define by the time you get to the 90s.
Yeah. In the class, and how much do you touch on punk? And also, kind of in tandem, is the class focused on American rock music or just rock, and talking about the what's going on over in the UK?
It's a lot of UK stuff. I definitely do the British invasion, and yeah, I actually, other than trying to think of, not a whole lot of artists outside of, I definitely do some Joni Mitchell. Okay. And so, yeah, as far as, say, Canadian artists there, Rush. Right. But it's mainly American, other than the British artists. But yeah, as far as the other question on punk, my problem by the time I get to the 70s is there's just not enough time for everything I want to do. I used to do a thing on Southern rock that I had to take out there. It's like, and that hurts me a little bit. Allman Brothers, Skynyrd. Yeah. That
hurts you that you can't do.
It hurts me that I had to take it out.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the 70s, you got your James Taylor singer-songwriter stuff. Mm-hmm. There's prog. There's 70s soul. I think that was kind of your golden age, like your Stevie Wonder albums that came out.
Sure. Yeah. Late 60s, 70s. Yeah.
And that stuff's super important. And some of the kind of like what the prog rock stuff turned into, I feel, is some of the stadium rock, arena rock. Sometimes you could call it corporate rock, I suppose. The like your Bostons and Journey and Foreigner.
Okay, yeah.
That. Right. And and then by the time that's all done, we're midway through the semester anyway. And punk and disco, I kind of do those. I used to do a 3-hour class in 9 to noon on Fridays. And so it was basically like 2 lectures on the same day, and worked out really well for me because Rancho Cucamonga is kind of a hike.
Yeah.
So I would do like an hour and 15 minutes, and take a short break, and then do another one. So I would do punk and disco on the same day, and
Okay. So
and
disco
then,
still made it into the class?
disco's in there.
All right.
That was important stuff, and
Yeah.
but having more in common than of course the two scenes are completely different, but they're in the same city. They both, of course there's British punk as well, but Studio 54 and CBGB. I'm not an expert on New York geography, but I would imagine that they're not like super far from each other. They're in the same city. They're
Yeah. I mean, Manhattan's not that big.
yeah, and you had your scenes of that there, and it starts in the small rooms as somewhat of a subculture, and then grew from there, and kind of took down the behemoth that was corporate rock and prog rock back then too. There are plenty of quotes you hear from people where they go to see an Emerson, Lake and Palmer concert and say, "I didn't know I was going to go see an orchestra. I thought I was going to go hear a rock concert." It's like, some of that stuff takes a little bit of the rock out of it, and once again, I appreciate that stuff. I love that stuff. I'm a classical musician. But I could understand that. You get back to your 3-minute songs that either put you out on the dance floor or get you to feel that same rock energy that they felt back in the mid to late 50s when that stuff was so new and exciting. And then, that's your next revolution there.
You talked about it, that we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of this, but the era in which rock is being established and evolved, and then you have all this music evolving, and you have the introduction of the record business, and people know how to now record it and duplicate it and get it out, and it becomes a business, and so that adds fuel to the fire for the whole thing. All this, everybody's got a sound now, and everybody's influenced by something else. But the racial divide of all that was massive. And I've how much I this is a sensitive question. I got to think about about an appropriate way to was the rock music, I don't want to say in your personal opinion, because I don't want to put you on the chopping block for this, but historically analyzing the history of rock, could you go to different points and have evidence to suggest that the forward of early rock music was just a display of white privilege?
I think there's a lot you could say about that. One of the reasons that rock really took off had a lot to do with the first audience weren't necessarily boomers. They were a little bit older than the baby boomers. It's like I define, like, if you define the baby boomers as being born after World War II, that's mid 40s there. So they would have been too young to really get into
what's the cutoff on the boomer generation? Like, my parents are boomers, but my dad was born in 49 and my mom was born in 53, I think. So I don't know when that cuts off.
It's you probably get different historians giving different numbers, but I've always heard 45 to 64.
45. Oh, 64. Wow. I mean,
well, it's 18, 19 years, because that's the time that they start having kids, and that's when your Gen X starts. So
sure, okay.
Yeah, you read a few different charts and you find the dividing lines a little different, but the end of World War II was a pretty that we have a date for that. So that's right. Like World War II veterans came home, had a bunch of kids, and that's where the boom started. But the first class of rockers were their audience would have been a little bit older. They called them the silent generation. They were either born during the Depression or during the war. So like someone who's a 16-year-old in 1955 hearing an Elvis or Chuck Berry record for the first time also coincided with and a lot of their parents might have been World War II veterans or maybe a little bit older than that. The economy was booming. You get the greatest generation that had that are that's my grandparents' generation. They serve in the war and then come back and just like build the backbone of the economy there. And they wanted a better life for their kids then.
And that was World War II you're talking about. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So that's kind of your rise of teen culture. And I actually, honestly, with all these classes being online now, I haven't done as much of the in-person lecture, and I always make sure that I look up exactly when the word teenager, its roots are actually right around that time. It was
Oh,
not.
really?
This isn't a word that they would have used before that, because actually you can look at a lot of pop music going before that. It's for adults.
Hmm.
So your rock was some of the first that was really there for teenagers, and that coincided, yeah, like I said, with the economy, with the you get kids driving their fancy cars, like your American Graffiti kind of movies where they're driving around. Like a lot of that is fake.
Right, that kind of James Dean uh thing, yeah.
So they had the ability, like their parents' generation would have grown up in the Depression, so they wouldn't have known, they wouldn't have had the ability to go out and buy records. So yeah, and also that record technology was changing at the time, the 45 single. So that was taken off around then.
We'll be back right after this.
Folks, I've been talking about it. No one has really taken me up on this yet. The middle of the show is for you. Get featured on the Bass Shed podcast. Share your news with the bass community worldwide. If you have a new lessons platform that you're want to drive some traffic to, let me know about it. You got a new single out, you got a new record coming out, you got some tour dates coming up. Whatever it may be, hit me up and get featured on the Bass Shed podcast. Right, if you are enjoying the interview with Chris Hornung, please take a second to subscribe to the Bass Shed here on YouTube. And while you're at it, give us the finger, huh? Can you? I'm gonna ask. Can you give us the finger? Give us a thumbs up. That's right. Let us know you like the video. Click on the little bell to get notified about new episodes that come out each week.
Excellent, sir.
So yeah, you could definitely make that case that especially when you're looking at like racial issues in the 50s, it's the privilege, and it's a generation that happened to have more expendable money than the other. And it's obviously every family is different, but I would think that a lot of your greatest generation parents, they have 5 kids and they want them to have a better life than they did. So they've got allowance money to spend. They've got a nice, your 57 Chevy.
Right.
Maybe not every kid.
Yeah, and listening, they probably have, radios and televisions and things around the house, media devices to expose the children to these new sounds. And so that, because I mean, the only way when the teenage culture gets introduced, the only way they could have heard would have been the television and radio. Because in the 40s, it was still largely, now I don't know about this, but I feel like that during then, the radio, it was playing music, but it was also doing these like story shows. Like what would be, the precursor to a television episode, there was just story time. Yeah,
that was you had your soap operas, and
right.
Like the Ozzie and Harriet show started out as a radio show. There's all kinds of things like that, and yeah, to your point on that one, that definitely in that time, that's that's white privilege. That's
right.
That was so, and that had to do with a lot of that music, and those kids were just loving the rhythm and blues, which eventually became called rock and roll, and had its roots in mostly black music back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all this stuff's pretty fascinating to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we don't see change like that anymore. Maybe we do, and when you're a part of it, you can't tell. Maybe you can only tell when you look back at things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually I always tell my class that they're going to hear more of my own perspective on it by the time we get to the 90s music than they probably want to know, because I was there for it. I can't tell them what it was like to watch the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in '64, but I can tell them what it was like to see the Smells Like Teen Spirit video when I was used to listen to Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses, and like how insane that was. But then when it gets like to the point on not understanding the revolution when it's happening, the Napster revolution was one that took a little while to realize what was going on, because I'd have conversations with friends of mine, and it's like, yeah, we're like, is there going to be another Nirvana? Could there be like another Beatles? Would that be even possible right now? And I appreciate this stuff more now, but I was just we were talking about all the boy band pop music that was all over MTV and all that stuff, and how much we missed Alternative Nation a few years. But then just like realizing that like all that other stuff, like you don't need to watch MTV for that. You can go, like now it's your streaming services, but back then you could get the stuff for free. You could share it with people, and of course that has all kind of issues with the artist getting paid, but it's at least as far as the music fan goes, your music that you're listening to doesn't have to be what's on the radio on MTV. It was a little different in 1991. So yeah, we didn't realize that was the revolution until years later. So if there's something happening now, I'm probably too old to be impacted by it, but maybe in 10 years we'll be talking about something from COVID era or something.
yeah
better. Yeah.
What was it? To go back to the Beatles, I think the Beatles, I mean, what they did within the world of music history, astronomical. Like there's no denying that. If I focus and when I think about like early Beatles, like Rudy Sarzo was just on the podcast last week, and he was talking about hearing that and what a game changer that was, seeing them on Ed Sullivan and hearing that, and then the next day at school everybody's wearing their hair like a Beatle and everybody wanted a guitar, and it overnight created this huge sensation. And this kind of ties into what I asked a second ago about white privilege, because I think culturally and what was happening in the war, they hit at the right place, right time. Like there was so much cultural and racial tension in America. Vietnam was happening. There's a lot of pressure in America. And then all of a sudden you have somebody from outside, that the parents would let their kids listen to, that wasn't a part of any of that. It was kind of outside of the racial thing, of a political thing. It was an escape from all the tension in America. And they just happened to be at the right place, right time, because I think the early Beatles wasn't that interesting.
Oh, the music wasn't that interesting?
Yeah, it wasn't interesting. I mean, I don't think the Beatles really came into their own until later when they started writing more interesting songs. Then you kind of understand the genius of each of, them. Maybe not Ringo. That's a whole other topic. At least three of them were brilliant.
Yeah.
And I don't think that happened till way later, because early Beatles to me isn't that fascinating. It's just pop music of the day, and it's just kind of like this bubblegum love song. Like, okay.
It's funny because I've talked to, and I'm sure you have as well, on some people are just like exactly the opposite on that. Like,
oh sure,
I loved all their first, like I love Can't Buy Me Love. I love All My Loving, all their boy girl love songs until they got weird.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Then they're out.
Yeah. I would.
I just like the weird stuff.
Yeah, as far as that, I one that I really found that I always liked and appreciated Buddy Holly before I started teaching my class. But I read a lot of stuff. One of the biographies on Buddy Holly that I've read a couple times, with his songwriting and what he did with his band, that was exactly the template for what the Beatles did later on in their early days. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Paul McCartney has said that many times in interviews. He seems like the biggest Buddy Holly fan on the planet.
And Little Richard, I mean, so much vocally what he's doing with all the yells and things. I mean, those are direct lineage to Little Richard.
Yeah, so they're kind of your next step after that, before they started to experiment a little bit more, and they smoked weed with Bob Dylan and that whole next step there. I can appreciate both sides of it for sure. But yeah, they were definitely in kind of that whole. Once again, it gets back to like the Tin Pan Alley. That's why I feel like I need to cover that first in my class. The songwriting form, your AABA, you got your bridge, your middle eight, as they called it, and you could analyze so many Beatles songs that are just exactly in that form, and they were masters of writing those songs. There's definitely some of those that I never need to hear again. I've heard enough.
Yeah.
And but yeah, then they took things to the next level after that.
Right. So I've been doing this new segment on the podcast where, and I think I want to amend it a little bit because we've been talking so much about history and a genre instead of just bass.
Mm-hmm.
But the segment has been where I list 5 bass players that are kind of all in the wheelhouse of whoever I'm speaking to get their initial thoughts on the bass player. But this one's different, and I was thinking about it, kind of when I was thinking through having you on today, and like, well, we could talk about bass players through rock history, which could be interesting. So I kind of want to talk about that, and then maybe the next thought that came up is like, well, who would be, bands that defined a decade or something? But I feel like that's already so built into, you have people like Buddy Holly in the 50s, 60s, obviously the Beatles. 70s, they could go a couple different ways. 80s could go a couple different ways. 90s, Nirvana, and then you're out. It's kind of paint by numbers. But on the 70s and 80s, who do you think are like, who set the tone for those sounds? Specifically 1970. We'll take it there. Like, first one that comes to mind for me is basically either Zeppelin or Bowie.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, different sides of that. I could absolutely. Right. When I'm teaching my class, I wouldn't say this definitely defines the era, but kind of your bridge between the 60s and 70s for me is James Taylor, because he actually recorded, like, his first album was put out by Apple. By the Beatles company, and kind of in the ashes of the Beatles breaking up, Paul McCartney and George Harrison both played on some of the stuff on his first album, and were big in pushing that. And
wow.
And also of the that particular era is just like, look at what was going on in history. The Vietnam War was raging, but the protests had died down because you get Richard Nixon, who was elected, and then not very happily elected by a lot of people who are against the war. Of course, a lot of people did vote for him, so that don't want to wade too much into that. But it's and so the whole idea is escape, and it's just kind of your laid back, easy, and the Eagles right around that same time.
Full circle,
yeah,
full circle, man.
So yeah, and as far as defining the entire decade, the 70s is so difficult because you also have, like, Yes and Rush doing like really interesting things with rock, and and you're right, like Bowie and Zeppelin doing things that would have been unthinkable 10 years before that. I think if I'm going to go back and listen to something, I'd go back once again to the Stevie Wonder. His like 5 or 6 albums in a row are just perfects that he had during that decade. I don't know if necessarily defining things culturally there, but that's just like speaks to how insane that decade was. And if I could go back and if I only had to listen to music from one decade, that might be the one that I would pick because of that.
The 70s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like late 60s would be, there was kind of all the precursor. Like, I think Bowie was a precursor to the glam of the 80s and the hair metal and all that, like that kind of personality. I always equate Bowie to be the driving force, even though he started in the 70s, but driving force of the 80s, because he was so revolutionary of the period. It was such a reaction to the thing of the 70s.
Yeah, and that's why he's such a... Actually, I heard on the radio that David Bowie died on my first class teaching history of rock. So it was like,
oh, wow.
I'll always connect that with that. Like, I'm about to talk about Tin Pan Alley and like read the syllabus, and I got to deal with the fact that like one of the greats just died this morning. And so that was that. Yeah, I'll always remember that.
How did you address that with the class? Did you like just put the syllabus on hold for a second and just like, all right, we're going right to Bowie, and we're just I
think that was a Monday. I think it was the Wednesday that I actually addressed it, because it was also my first lecture class, and I was nervous about a lot of things. And but yeah, then for the next one, it was just like, this is a history of rock class. We're not going to be covering him for a long time, but pull out some David Bowie if you haven't heard him. Listen to the Stardust album all the way through without playing with your phone or anything. Just like listen to track by track, and that's the one for me. Some people would say like Low or Lodger or Let's Dance or any of them. It's and yeah, as far as just like all the different styles, maybe Bowie is the perfect example because talking about all the, I think some of the best moments of soul are that decade as well. And you've got him with the Young Americans and stuff like that. He's taken influence from all those guys too.
Sure.
And making some incredible music. Yeah. It's a tough decade to define in that way.
Yeah. I feel like throughout recorded music history, you can start to hear the influence of people checking each other out. You know, you can hear the soul influence on the Beatles. You know, and it's like it wasn't competitive. It was, they really like, oh man, what they're doing is cool. It's like there was a respect there from artist to artist. And they would want to absorb some of those sounds and get that into what they were doing instead of just like, this record sold that much. How do we do that to sell this thing? And it's like, I feel like the artist was more interested in growing their artistry instead of just pushing the commerce.
Right. Yeah. And that was, and at the same time, the record industry, I guess kind of the same thing we were talking about with the late 90s. They they catch up and figure out what sells and then want everybody to do that. Think about the, and this isn't to trash these artists, but your friend Peter Frampton Comes Alive, and the Fleetwood Mac Rumors were both sold insane amounts of copy. Yeah, and of course you can say the Eagles inside and like their greatest hits album with all that, just like numbers that no one's ever going to see again. But that was during a time that like a bunch of other artists were getting pressured to do the same thing and make hits in that way. So yeah, kind of leads us to the punk and disco idea of like bring it back to the small rooms and the excitement that was there before. But the artist that did really well, that succeeded with that, with taking influence from other artists and making your artistic statements back then, are the ones that we're listening to now.
Because of the years that rock and roll started to hit the scene, whether by term or feel. And that's so closely related to the evolution of the record industry. Are you able to teach rock music without talking about the record industry? Because it feels like the record industry drove rock more than rock would have done without the record industry. If that makes sense. Like, I don't know if rock would be rock without albums, you know, like the way blues was always going to be blues, or jazz as a dance music was always going to be. That was very much a people's music, and that would exist whether it was documented on a record or not. I don't know about rock. It feels like when you talk about rock, you always have to talk about the record industry.
Yeah, talk, and I definitely feel like that's important to connect to that. And for me, I'm a fan of the music, so it's the music is what I'm going to be most passionate about. But like the Telecommunications Act in 1996, and it's that stuff is significant. It's important. It's important to know about that. Important to know about the industry. Always covering the video killed the radio star with MTV, and how significant that became, and the way that impacted the industry. That record stores had to start stocking the stuff that kids were watching on MTV because that was what they were buying. That was like your national, almost like a national radio station. Really, you had stuff that you could that kids in all different parts of the country would see, and then they would go to their. But imagine them going to like probably a Kmart at the time in like the middle of Oklahoma to buy like a Cyndi Lauper record, and they have no idea.
Everything about that sounds dismal. Maybe not Cyndi Lauper, but everything else sounds awful. All right, to circle back on the bass player thing. And early rock, I think there's maybe unqualifiable. Like, I don't know who played on a Chuck Berry record. Like I would have had to do some real research on like old early rock and roll bass player records to find out who the bass player was. So the game of like me pulling off 5 rock bass players throughout history is kind of rough. what bass players would you cite as being formative for the rock genre throughout history? Like if you go through it chronologically, like five people from the onset of rock and roll until, whoever you wanted to end with.
I'd say Elvis's bass player, Bill Black, is definitely significant. Maybe mainly because of who he was attached to, but he wouldn't have stayed in his band if he wasn't good.
Right.
Continued along with him. Definitely more than a bass player, but Paul McCartney. Just as far as an overall artist. Thinking about him more as he was a guitarist who played bass because their bass player left. That was how he started doing that. But and he could play anything. But listen to some of those Paul McCartney bass lines from, I'm thinking like your Rubber Soul to Revolver era, in particular. There are some killer bass lines. He knew what to do with the instrument.
When he got out of just doubling the left hand of the piano or mimicking the left hand of a piano, I mean, because I think a lot of that early stuff, that's all that was going on there. And for all the transcribing I've done of him through different periods, and reading stuff about him and how he looked up to James Jamerson, you could definitely hear the soul influence on him. Like he might have been on drugs, but the feel on Taxman or Hey Bulldog is definitely different, than the feel of how he was just playing some of the early lines. In addition to the lines themselves, were more bass playery and less piano left hand.
Sure. And actually that I was like Jamerson, of course, I chronologically probably should have said his name first, but definitely I was actually a thought that came to mind. John Patitucci came to my college to do a couple concerts in masterclass. That was actually also right when I started teaching at Concordia.
I've seen those online, actually. I've seen those.
So really cool that I got to meet him, and he got to meet students that I had just met. He was bringing out his electric and was like, all right, this is this. He was talking about some of the lines that influenced him and was playing like a couple Four Tops lines. Yeah. Wow, really cool to hear someone like him play that stuff.
Yeah, he's one of his big ones was I Was Made to Love Her. One of his, I've heard and read that he's played that a lot at clinics before and will cite that. But Jamerson's playing with the Four Tops is some of my favorite.
Yeah,
the line to Bernadette. I mean, the Stevie Wonder stuff too, but the Four Tops stuff is killer.
So that was a bit of a tangent on the.
That's fine.
Also, more than a bass player, I suppose I can relate a little bit to John Paul Jones and the classical background that he has. I know he wasn't like an orchestral bass player, but he was doing a lot of classical piano stuff before he started playing with Led Zeppelin, and a lot of the lines that he has. I just saw it's probably out of the theaters by now, but there's the Becoming Led Zeppelin, I think is the name of the documentary that recently came out.
Okay.
I saw it in the theater because I was like, I have to go and hear these Led Zeppelin live tunes.
Yeah.
Like on the big screen. It was really cool. Another band that would have been amazing to see live back in the day. And actually going into his, he had a musical family where he was doing a lot of piano and organ, kind of like musical theater stuff before he got into rock and roll. And I think you can kind of hear that in his lines too. Incredibly musical and rock in there.
The blues based nature of it, but then you have the kind of the 16th note thing, that was happening around that time in different genres. I mean, Jamerson had established it on bass. Then you have, the late 60s with funk happening and all the 16th note, the drive that's coming out of bass lines in the James Brown stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
There's a nice fusion in his playing of so many different styles.
Yeah. And actually one thing on the John Paul Jones thing that, I had heard is when Jimmy Page contacted him, he initially was hesitant because he wanted to play soul and funk. That was more where his heart was. And he knew that Page was going to do this really heavy stuff that he wasn't interested in at all. And of course then that makes sense. You can hear that their bass lines are funky. It's not, and actually, I've lost track of how many names this is, but as far as like your heart of heavy metal, like Geezer Butler.
Actually, let's go back because I was just thinking about that. I lost two. We had McCartney. I already blanked on his name, but the guy with Elvis.
Yeah.
Elvis, McCartney, Jamerson, John Paul Jones.
Oh, got to give a couple of them from my era. Everybody who pulled out an electric bass was trying to play those Primus lines and the Red Hot Chili Peppers stuff.
Sure.
I don't know if I could pick one of those guys over the other one with Les and Flea. Both incredibly influential to me as a. Yeah, even though classical has always been my heart, I played in some like hippie jam bands when I was in high school, and of course like slapping on all that stuff with the rock stuff. And actually, I was somewhat of a different tangent with this. I have watched your podcasts in the past. To prepare for this one, I listened to a couple of them all the way through yesterday, and I listened to PJ from the San Diego Symphony.
Yeah.
And I also listened to Joe Ayub. I know we've talked about this before.
Oh yeah. You went to college with him.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the first time that you've interviewed two former college roommates out of all here. Oh,
you guys were roommates, but now was Lyman there the same era?
Lyman was there at the same time. Yeah, he was a grad student when we were all. And I don't know if you ever knew Roger Shue. Roger.
No, I didn't. He was more Orange County based before I was going to Orange County as much as I do now. But I have some friends that played a lot with him and have only heard great things.
Yeah, he was a really good friend. Real tough to lose him a few years ago. And we were all there at the same time. We were all. Okay. There's probably a picture someone could dig up of all of us in Western Michigan University bass section in the orchestra.
Yeah. Right, like looking at a college picture, everybody has long hair except Joe. His hair looks the exact same. Ayub still has the same do.
So, yeah, as far as the rock stuff, I was like full on orchestral major, but really cool to be living with Joe and hearing him figuring out these like rock and pop bass lines and all that stuff. And yeah, I'm an Orange County guy too, so I'm the other way. I don't get up to LA as much as I would like to, so I haven't seen him in a while. But I listened to his podcast last night.
I've heard. I forgot who was telling, but he's doing the Kelly Clarkson show now too. So he's between here and I forgot what he was. I think he was doing The Voice out here, and then he's Voice or Idol. I think it's Idol actually. So he's doing Idol and then going back, and he's just staying busy, jumping the country.
Yeah.
It always fascinates me when classical musicians listen to something in their free time that I would have never guessed. Like I love being shocked by this. I remember talking to a bass player from Spain, and she's like, I love 90s hip hop. Like I love Biggie Smalls, and I'm like, really? That's hilarious. What are some quintessential rock records that you always find yourself revisiting? Like if you want to put on a rock record, like what are going to be like the top few that you're going to reach for?
I've gone through phases. I feel like I'm always going through phases. Joni Mitchell's music through her whole career, but she had a few real classics in the 70s. I think I go back to For the Roses and Hijira from her. When she was starting to get a little more jazz influence. I don't know if you call it rock, but it's
Yeah, I mean that whole rock folk thing, like the couple. Obviously, I like the jazz influenced period of hers that had Jocko on it. I like Blue. I like that, the old folky stuff. And then she did a record in 2000 called Both Sides Now that I absolutely love because the whole trajectory of the record mirrors the arc of a romantic relationship. So some of them are her tunes, some of them are standards. Wayne Shorter plays on it. It'll start like when you meet somebody and it's so exciting. And the first track I think is You're My Thrill. And then the album ends with Both Sides Now and questioning life and questioning love and the whole thing. But the theme of the album is brilliant. And Vince Mendoza, I think, did all the arrangements on it. Like it's a brilliant record. It's one of my top 5 favorite records ever.
Oh yeah, I had listened to that one at one point. I haven't spent as much time with it as your '70s stuff, but
yeah.
I would say if there's like something from my childhood that somewhat childhood, I was a teenager, but I'd go back to is the Nirvana Unplugged album. Is one that I think some of the best moments are on that. It's a bit of a dark listen, knowing that he's gonna commit suicide in 3 months, but it's just
okay.
Just cool
let's talk a little bit more. Let's dig into this. I don't know. Maybe this will get edited out because of time. You've seen the documentaries that came out maybe like 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's because of my conspiracy theorist nature. Whatever. I'm not going full tilt on all conspiracy theories. I do think there's probably an element of truth that's in every conspiracy theory that I think gets exploited too far. I personally subscribe a little bit more to Courtney being behind it. That documentary.
There's definitely some. They make a good case that there's a lot of suspicious things going on.
There's interesting evidence. We'll put it that way. Yeah, that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's the rock albums thing. I feel like I go through so many phases that coming up. I could go for any Stevie Wonder album from the '70s. Those are always right up there. Been into Black Sabbath's 4th album recently.
Okay.
I feel like their first 3. Sometimes I don't know if you go through where you just listen to something so much that it's hard to go back to it. It's like a lot of Led Zeppelin albums are like that for me.
Like you've exhausted the record.
Yeah, it's a number of them. I'm immediately thinking of like 30 different albums. I could say that. Yeah, so Black Sabbath's 4th album, as far as just like that's just like the greatest heavy metal. I feel just one of those you can just really crank up and just like all those guys playing at their peak.
Yeah.
Right now I'm reading a biography on Woody Guthrie. So a lot of time I've been pulling some of his old like Union protest Dust Bowl ballad music out. That it's like almost kind of feels like the punk rock of the time. It's
right.
It's 3 chords and it's a message that's not going to get played on the radio. And you hear actually even Tom Morello covers some of his songs sometimes, and we'll talk about it. Yeah. He had the "This Machine Kills Fascists" sign on his guitar, and just someone whose life I'd never really known about, and I cover him a little bit in my class, but I just got interested in him, so I'm reading that biography. And
what were the years he was active or releasing music or cited as being his career? What years are we talking? I know the name and I know like an idea of sound, but I can't pinpoint a tune,
I would say probably mostly the 40s. By the time you get to the 50s, the Red Scare had come around, and he literally was a member of the Communist Party. So his music got banned. Pete Seeger was closely connected with him, and what Seeger would say later on was that by them taking him off the radio and putting him in like coffee houses, he was playing for a lot of college kids, and he was sometimes playing for like summer camps for young kids. Like probably had more of an impact. Like those kids that were hearing those folk protest songs in the 50s became the hippies in the 60s.
Right.
And that's his whole other thing there. Woody also had Huntington's disease, and so he his life was cut pretty short. He's featured in I don't know if you've seen the new Bob Dylan movie.
I haven't. I wanted to when I was like seeing the trailers of it and stuff, and then I lost track of it.
He's featured there just about the way that I was picturing him. Bob Dylan, a young Bob Dylan, went to New York and he went to New York to play in the Greenwich Village coffee house scene, but he also went to meet Woody, who was in a hospital at that point, who was nonverbal. His body had pretty much shut down, and he was in his last few years of his life. And very sad ending to that. The Huntingtons took him out of the picture, along with the Red Scare taking his music off the radio. But Sorry, that's a long rambling answer to you.
No. How old? Actually, I didn't know that about the Huntingtons. How old was he when he left?
I would have to look that up. I think that disease tends to take people out in their 40s, so that's a really tough. So it's a genetic thing. His mother had it as well.
Oh wow.
But yeah, as far as just someone coming from the writing protest songs about just union issues back in the Depression, and that's one piece of the puzzle. Him and Hank Williams were the two big influences on Bob Dylan, and there you go from there.
Yeah, right. And then Dylan, and then thoughts on Bob Dylan, real quick. If you can put all that in, all of Dylan into a nutshell, but
after the other two names that I mentioned, I would say he's one of your best American songwriters. Mm-hmm. Just really changed. I've heard him also mentioned as maybe your first alternative artist. Kind of weird to say that, but even Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Elvis all wanted to be popular. Like when he goes and plays electric guitar on stage for a bunch of folkniks who he knows are not gonna want to hear that. I'm sure there are other people who did similar things before that. You could go all the way back to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring or something like that.
Right.
Doing something that's so radical that that you're going to turn off a huge percentage of your audience. But but someone who also took the risks in that way, and by creating folk rock in that way, and always have that, the influence that you have on the Beatles and everybody else after that. You're not just writing love songs anymore. And we have a lot of the artistry that came after that to thank for at least him being one of the first popular, significant artists to do things like that. Yeah,
I agree. I'm really having holding up a mirror to society. Like he was, when I think about him and I think about the music that he released, not all of it, but a good chunk of it, like who he is in my mind is he was always holding up a mirror to society in hopes that people would be inspiring to change by seeing themselves, so I feel like so much of his collection was here's what it is, take a look at yourself, don't just be better, that's kind of his approach to it all. It wasn't super what's the word? It wasn't directing people, this is what you have to do, but it was a gentler, just take a look at yourself and go forward and make different decisions.
Yeah, and particularly his early 60s stuff, the Times They Are a-Changin' and Blowin' in the Wind.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the songs I was thinking about.
He also had thinking of the connection with the alternative music, just think more of the way that his career went after maybe the Newport Festival audience in 1965 was not a fan of his electric guitar, but Like a Rolling Stone was a huge hit, and a lot of people throughout the world love that stuff. And then your hippie culture, folk rock music took off. The Beatles' Rubber Soul was right around that same time. Then he turned his back on all that stuff, and he made a couple albums in Nashville and was doing duets with Johnny Cash.
Right.
And, just completely turning away from the direction his music was going. And one of the thoughts that I had watching the Bob Dylan movie in the theater was it'd be really cool if they made a sequel of that one on his Christian rock era.
I didn't even know about that. Did he do a Christian rock thing?
Yeah, he was raised Jewish.
Okay.
But later in his career, he became born again Christian. He put out 3 albums that are basically Christian rock.
Oh wow!
They're usually not ranked as some of his best, but
sure.
But there's some songs that are known from that era. I think "Gotta Serve Somebody."
Okay.
But yeah, he would be openly witnessing in his concerts, and it was just such an interesting life.
He always had the element of punk in whatever era he was doing. He was always there's always a shock value to all of it.
And getting nominated for a Nobel Prize for literature, your first pop artist to ever have that happen, and he doesn't attend the ceremony.
Yeah.
Barack Obama and basically just walks away from him.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh man, that's crazy. I got to go read up on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Man, Chris, this has been great, man. Thanks for being on.
Really
Yeah.
fun. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Come back on. Actually, let's talk a little bit more about the bass next time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
All right.
Really fun talking about all the rock stuff too. So
Cool. Yeah, this was fun.
Thanks.
I learned a lot from it.
Yo, this is Craig Gash. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the Instagram, the YouTube.
Okay.
Leave us a comment.
All right. That was my talk with Chris Hornung. Man, I learned a lot from that interview, right? What he brought up about teenage culture, right? And the term teenager and when that kind of entered society. I thought that was really fascinating. Like I geek out, I nerd out on stuff like that. That was fascinating to me because then thinking about it, so much of the music industry is aimed right at teenage culture and that fan base. All that stuff and that time period within the world, right? Kind of the baby boomer generation before that, how recording technology and the record industry was picking up a lot of steam back then, and how they're all working together. Completely fascinating to me. I look forward to having Chris back on the show soon, and maybe we can actually talk more specifically about bass. That's all I got for this one, folks. That's all I got. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.